Welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve deeper into the most up-to-date issues across the globe. I'm Kmun학의. In a groundbreaking moment for literature, novelist Han Kang has become the first ever Asian woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. The Swedish Academy announced Han as this year's laureate, recognizing her for her, quote, intense poetic prose that confronts historical traumas and exposes the fragility of human life. Upon hearing the news, the author said she was very much surprised and honored, adding that the books she read since childhood have been her source of inspiration. The South Korean author first saw international fame after winning the Man Booker International Prize for Fiction in 2016 for her novel The Vegetarian. Now, with the triumph, the 53-year-old becomes the first South Korean winner of the Literature Prize and just the second South Korean to become a Nobel laureate. So what makes Han's work so special to captivate the hearts of the global audience? And what does her eye-opening achievement mean for Korean literature? For answers to this, we are joined by Barbara Zitwer, CEO of Barbara J. Zitwer International Literary Agency in New York. Welcome to the show, Barbara.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we're also invite David Tizzard, Professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. Great to have you, Professor.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Very proud to be here on this great occasion for Korea.
Thank you for both of you. Now, so let's begin with Barbara. Barbara, what a surprise. As the person who played a big role in exporting Han Kang's The Vegetarian to the English language market, I must ask, how do you feel? I'm guessing you would feel a lot of pride about the latest achievement.
Well, first of all, I discovered Han Kang when she was not even really known in Korea. She had sold less than 7,000 copies in Korea. And I introduced her books, The Vegetarian, Human X, and The White Book. So I've been a huge fan of hers from the beginning. And I was thrilled. First of all, I'm totally thrilled for her. It's the greatest honor any writer could have in the world. And it places her in the canon of the greatest writers ever in the history of Earth. So I think people will be reading her book for as long as we exist, and winning the Nobel Prize really is such a validation of her work. And it's I wasn't surprised, because I've been saying for many years that I was very certain that a Korean writer, and probably her, would win the Nobel Prize one day soon.
Well, I must say, you have a very good eye. Last year in your travel essay, The Korean Book of Happiness, you confidently predicted that a Korean author would soon win the Nobel Prize. Did you expect it to happen this quickly?
I'm not, in a sense, I'm not surprised, because with the rise of Korean culture around the world, which I think really started exploding when Parasite won the Oscar. And I've seen a voracious appetite of readers, viewers, fans of Korea, Squid Games, Parasite, Korean books. I started representing Korean books maybe 12 years ago, and no one had Korean books on their publishing list, and now everyone has them. So it was just a matter of moments, I think, because Korea is the hottest cultural scene in the world, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now let's also bring in Professor Tizzard to the conversation. Professor, what significance do you think Han Kang's winning of this Nobel Prize in Literature have for both the domestic and international community?
It's a huge triumph, and the people of Korea are obviously very proud. It's so nice to witness the country experience this surge of joy go through it. I think when you ask about the international and the Korean communities, it's going to be fantastic, because they're going to start talking to each other more. Now, Han Kang has been writing here domestically for 30-odd years. She comes from a literary tradition, both in her family and in Korea. And it's going to allow people from outside of Korea to learn about this tradition. And it's also going to allow people inside of Korea to see how the outside world perceives this. This evening, I was having a conversation with somebody who didn't know the English title of Sonyeon Yonda in Korean. The Human Acts is called A Boy Comes, something like that. The English translation of the title is Human Acts. And so we're getting these two representations of Han's work. And I think it's wonderful how these communities are going to come together and hopefully understand each other. In terms of the literary community domestically, I'd like to say this in that working at a university, I've seen, especially a women's university, I've seen just how much this victory has meant to many young women. And not about the industry right now, but the future industry, young adults, people in their late teens, early 20s, and even later, they're going to see this victory. And it's going to give them hope. It's going to give them confidence. It's going to give them this idea that maybe I can write a book. Maybe if I put my voice down and my words down on paper, I will be heard, I will be seen. And so I think it really bodes well for the future of Korea and encouraging more and more writers to express themselves in the way that Han Kang has done thus far.
Right, so it's a very symbolic achievement indeed in many aspects. Now let's delve deeper into her work. Barbara, what do you find the most compelling about Han Kang's stories? Why do you think it has received so much acclaim from critics overseas?
Well, I think she writes about completely universal ideas and thoughts, and I think that she writes about the deepest, most profound issues of life and pain and war and women, and I mean, everything she writes about. The thing that I'm especially thrilled about is that a writer of her originality and her unique voice and style, which is not a classic style of writing in the West, has found such enormous acclaim and now won this award. So she's a real original. And I think over time, people have grown to appreciate, want to understand, want to read her work more and more because it is so original. There's no one like Han Kang. If you read a Han Kang book, you don't need to see the cover of the book or even to see her name on it. You know it's her voice. So I think it's her originality, it's the themes, the things that she writes about, and they're very emotional. It's an emotional experience reading her works, and that's undeniable. So I think that's what people feel. They feel her work. Mm-hmm. It's a very kind of meditative, emotional experience that is undeniable.
Yeah, so readers could kind of relate to the stories. What about you, Professor Tizzard? What makes author Han's work stand out?
I'm going to give you a slightly different approach from Barbara here. And if I can, I'm going to read you 4 sentences from Human Acts, which we must remember were written by Deborah Smith or were translated by Deborah Smith. So are we reading the same as Han Kang? Not quite sure. But this is from Human Acts. It says, "Why would you sing the national anthem for people who have been killed by soldiers? Why cover the coffin with the teguki as though it wasn't the nation itself that had murdered them? But the generals are rebels. They seized power unlawfully. You must have seen it, people being beaten and stabbed in broad daylight and even shot. How can you call them the nation?" Now, what I think Han is doing here, it puts her in the tradition of writers like Park No-hye, who was a dissident poet-writer in the 1980s. And Han Kang, rather than her style, I see her she's saying the things that should not be said in Korean society. She's questioning the history. She's drawing attention to the darkest moments. And it's not just Gwangju, but she's doing it with the existence of women in the vegetarian. And she's done it more recently with her book on the Jeju uprising, in which tens of thousands of people were killed in the late 40s. Han is putting the spotlight on all of the uncomfortable situations, the darkest corners of Korean history that people are often afraid to look at. And she's talking about them in such a way that brings you into them. So yes, there are styles that we can talk about, and we would also need to consider the translation and whose style are we reading. But for me, Han Kang is the voice of democracy. Han Kang is one voice that speaks for the nation of people, and I think it's an incredibly powerful voice, one voice representing a country almost.
Wow, you gave me goosebumps. Now, let's return. So as we mentioned slightly a while ago, Han Kang has become the first Asian woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. And Barbara, we hear you also showcase works by other Korean female authors, including Shin Kyung-suk and Chung Yu-jung. What unique qualities do you think Korean female writers have in common in their storytelling?
Well, I think that what's unique, the Korean writers, the women writers, the Korean writers express themselves in a very different way, I think, than Western writers. The style of writing, very often they're mosaics. They're told from different points of view. When I started, I handled mostly women writers who had never dominated the Korean publishing scene because they were mostly male writers. But when Kyung-suk Shin and Han Kang and Jang Yi-jang and Kyung Ren-jo and Ji Young-gang also is a huge feminist writer dealing with a lot of social issues and incredible taboo issues in Korea also. They express themselves in a way that is penetrating, different. It makes Western readers see issues in a new way because of the way they write. You know, Han Kang's work, Kyung-suk Shin's Please Look After Mom, that book was told from the point of view of the children, to the son, the daughter, the husband, and then finally the mother who's missing, and you don't hear from the entire book. You hear from her in the end. It's Zhang Yuzhang writes her books as I said, mosaics. There you have to piece together. So a reader, you know, I've been trying to explain. People ask me all the time, what is it about Korean books? What makes them different? What makes them, you know, special? It's the Koreanness. Just like I can't explain. It's their style of writing and their view of the world and the way they view the world. And I think they were very powerful, a lot of these women writers, because they really dominated the publishing scene when they started writing. And no one had ever, before it had been men. So I think that they're also emotional, and they're dealing with issues that people all over the world can deal with, but in a very unique way. Human acts. I mean, the vegetarian, a woman who thinks she's becoming a tree and does become a tree. Mm-hmm. In the end of the book, it's just, you know, it's an idea. It's a story that no one had really heard of before. Right. As a metaphor for this woman's issue, you know, and her marginalization. So I think that a lot of women writers in Korea found very unique ways to write about the marginalization of women, and it was refreshing. Everyone in the West wants something new. They want to read something new. They want a new point of view. So it makes them see, you know, the 60s was the beginning of the women's movement in America, and in Korea it came later. But all these authors in Hong Kong, now the Nobel Prize winner, is at the forefront of, I think, women's writers who are depicting the marginalization of women and then the strength of women. Mm-hmm. You know, I see a lot of young writers who are you know, breaking a lot of barriers and not afraid, and writing a lot about taboo subjects, and including LGBTQ writers. A writer like Dolki Min, who wrote Walking Practice. Mm-hmm. When I discovered his book, and his book has been published now in the West, and we just sold a big movie deal to Dakota Johnson's company, I felt like Dolki Min, his book was as unique and different as the first time I read The Vegetarian.
Right, so there's very unique styles of writing. These kinds of new authors are emerging in this also from Korea and also from abroad. Now, following news of Han's triumph, websites of major bookstores have been paralyzed due to surging demand for her works. Professor, many of us are familiar with Han's most famous work, The Vegetarian, like Barbara just mentioned. Which of her other books would you recommend to the international audience?
I think the best book that she's written, only in my personal opinion, of course, is Human Acts. It's an incredibly powerful book, one that will affect you in multiple ways. I was actually speaking to a young woman from Sweden today who said that she read Human Acts a few years ago, and that was one of the pivotal moments in her making the decision to come to Korea. Now she's here studying at Hanyang University, and that book moved her in such a way, just as it moved me. Human Acts is an incredibly delicate and moving look at life and what the body is and what the soul is. I'll try not to give too many spoilers, but that's the one to look at. And beyond that, I would say to look at the way Han Kang presents her life and her work. Today, she announced that she wouldn't be giving any press conferences or celebrations because there are wars going on around the world, and she doesn't want to indulge in revelry while people suffer. Now, this is a mark of somebody that's deeply committed to a way of life. This is not just books, but this is a philosophy. This is a worldview. And so I would encourage people not just to look at the literary output that Han Kang has done, but also what she stands for more broadly and how she conducts herself. Because when she received the phone call from the Nobel Prize people, she was having dinner with her son. And when asked to give press conferences today, she said, despite all of the nation wanting to rejoice and feeling that, she said, let's pay attention to what's happening. This, to me, is almost as powerful as anything she's written, and I think she should be lauded for her attitude in this.
Right, so we must understand the author in order to better understand her works. Professor, do you believe Han Kang's Nobel Prize will impact the global spread of K-literature and K-content? If so, how?
It absolutely will. From my personal perspective, I think the high point of the Hallyu boom was probably with BTS and Dynamite and Butter and those English language songs. It really sort of penetrated into the mainstream. And there's an idea in cultural studies or sociology that when something goes mainstream, it's not cool anymore. Then people are looking for the next subculture. They're looking for the next thing. And we've seen that. We've seen, of course, K-pop is still popular, but we've seen a shift from the young people into different music genres. But people are still interested in Korea. And I think now they're looking for something, this is not to say K-pop is not deep, but they're looking for a different avenue into Korea. We've seen this with food, culinary shows on streaming platforms and such forth. And now what this does with this literature breakthrough, it just opens another door for people to become interested in Korea, to learn more about this country and the story. There are many different Koreas. I said that Han Kang is the voice of a nation, the voice of democracy here, but there are many different Koreas, and hopefully they can use her as a bridge to discover the many fascinating things that this country has to offer. And I'm sure that will be the case in the next couple of years.
Right. What about you, Barbara? In what ways do you think Han Kang's recognition will influence emerging writers in Korea and beyond?
Well, it's such a validation to Korea and Korean writers. And I think that my experience with a lot of Korean writers is that they've been very timid, they've been very shy, they don't see themselves as powerful, as strong, as validated as authors from other countries. One conversation I had with someone was, I was, telling them to be more out there and aggressive about their work and proud of who they were. And they're like, you don't understand, Barbara. We're a shrimp between two whales. I said, what do you mean? It's like, we're a shrimp between China and Japan. And I said to him, no, you don't understand. You're a whale now. So, he started laughing. And I think that winning the Nobel Prize is such a huge validation and approval of the world that it will give a lot of confidence to young writers. And also it brings huge attention to Korean books and, everything Korean. But I think it'll give people more confidence in themselves, their voices, speaking up for themselves. I hope that, a lot of Korean publishers, editors, a lot of people I know, they are kind of isolated in their world. They don't speak other languages. They don't speak English. They don't, socialize in book fairs or with other people from other countries. And I hope, and I think this will make it easier to start a conversation and to want to be part of the global community.
All right, we're running out of time, but before we go, we want to say congratulations to Han Kang again, who clinched an amazing achievement. We couldn't be prouder. And I'm sad to say we have to wrap up our discussion here. But now that Han Kang really paved the way for more interest in Korean literature, I hope to speak to both of you again soon on more accomplishments from Korean writers and novelists. Many thanks to you both tonight.
Thank you.
Now that wraps up our program for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back on Monday at 8:30 p.m. Korea time. Have a great weekend.